Yo guys, welcome back to another video. Today, I wanted to dive into my T16 Mundunugu Witch Doctor, which has been an absolute blast for me this season. I've been using this build quite a bit to actually farm GR keys, and it goes very quickly. I'm up to 5,800 keys right now. I've only really been at it for maybe just over a week now. This build is fantastic for people who are looking for something that's maybe a little bit lazy. All you honestly do is kind of run from point A to point B, and your Mana 2 rune on the Spirit Barrage absolutely nukes everything around you. Now on top of that, this build moves incredibly fast. We actually have 100% uptime on our Spirit Walk so long as we're not casting spells. We don't actually have to cast that often because our Mana 2 rune is taking care of everything around us. When you want to break it, all you have to do is cast 3 spells. Now once you've done that, we stack a lot of cooldown reduction as well, and so the Spirit Walk is going to be back up really quickly, allowing you to move through rifts incredibly fast. Let's go ahead and start by diving into the skills. First up, I recommend taking Locust Swarm with Pestilence. This is very nice because we are using the Ring of Emptiness, which enemies affected by the Locust Swarm or Haunt are going to be taking up to 300% more damage from our spells. Now, as an alternative to Locust Swarm, if you don't like having to get in melee range to cast that, you can take Haunt, and there's a couple of good runes for this as well. Resentful Spirits is going to release 2 spirits with every cast, which is pretty nice because you can get it applied to a few enemies really quickly. Alternatively, Lingering Spirit is also quite nice because it will just float around you until there's an enemy within range, and it will naturally target it for you. You may consider taking Haunt if you're not quite as geared yet, and getting into melee is a little bit risky if you're afraid of dying. So, once you have gear though, I would definitely recommend going with the Locust Swarm and Pestilence. It just spreads a lot better. Next up, we're going to take Spirit Barrage with Mana 2. This is what the build is absolutely all about. This is going to create a specter above your head that is going to shoot out missiles at all enemies around you. Next up, we'll be taking Horrify with Stalker. This is to gain 20% additional movement speed, but on top of that, because we're fearing enemies, we are going to proc our Wretchel's Ring of Larceny, which is going to give us additional movement speed on top of that. Next up, we'll be taking Spirit Walk with Severance. This is going to give us greatly increased movement speed, and it is going to last permanently until we cast 3 spells. This is because in the cube, we are using Shukrani's Triumph. Next up is Soul Harvest with Soul to Waste. Once again, we're just going for more movement speed and a little bit of additional intelligence. And lastly, we'll be taking Big Bad Voodoo with Boogeyman. This is going to summon a few zombie dogs for us to kind of act as shields for our character, but also increase the attack and movement speed of our character. Moving along to the passives, I like to take Pierce the Veil. This is quite nice because we're not really casting spells all that often. Our Mana 2 rune on the Spirit Barrage is doing all of the work, so this is just additional damage. Next up, we'll be taking Gruesome Feast. This is just going to give us a lot more mana, but more importantly, going to give us more intelligence. Moving along, we're going to be taking Graven Justice as well. This is going to reset our cooldowns incredibly quickly. We're also stacking a bunch of cooldown reduction on this character as well, so we can effectively spam our skills incredibly fast. Next up is Fierce Loyalty for some more movement speed. This is going to synergize with the Boogeyman rune on Big Bad Voodoo, giving us the zombie dogs so that we can increase our movement speed even further. Okay, and moving into the gear, we're going to be using 5 pieces of Mundunugu. We do have a Ring of Royal Grandeur in the cube, which is going to get us that 6-piece set bonus. We're also going to be using 2 pieces of Captain Crimson and benefiting from the 3-piece set. Before we dive into some of the optimal rolls, don't really worry too much about your gear. As you'll notice, most of my gear is non-ancient. It's not augmented. This is just a T16 build. Enemies are going to die just as quickly, even if your gear is a little bit suboptimal. But starting with the stats that you're going to want for the helm: Intelligence, Vitality, Crit Chance, a socket with a diamond in it. For the shoulders, Intelligence, Vitality, cooldown reduction, and resource cost reduction. Moving on to the necklace, we're going to be using squirts. I would recommend using your Crafted Primal Ancient on this if you don't have a quadfecta roll. I would go with cold damage, crit chance, crit damage, and a socket with Molten Wildebeest Gizzard. For the gloves, Mundunugu's Rhythm. Intelligence, crit chance, crit damage, cooldown reduction. For the chest piece, we'll also be taking Mundunugu's Intelligence, Vitality, percent life will do just fine. There are plenty of other rolls that you can take on the percent life. You could opt to go with armor or even reduce damage from elites. And for the 3 sockets, I would recommend using Topaz. Moving on to the wrists, we're going to be using Warzeshian Arm Guards. Cold damage, intelligence, vitality, crit chance are the stats you want. Moving along to the belt, you can go with the Captain Crimson set, or alternatively, if you wanted to go with Gold Wrap, you could do that too, to make your character incredibly tanky. However, I don't necessarily think you need it, and I prefer taking the cooldown reduction. But intelligence, vitality, all resist is okay. Armor is probably a little better because we are getting all resist from our intelligence. Percent life will also work well. Should you opt to go with the gold wrap, I would recommend using Mundunugu's pants here and just going with the 6-piece set bonus. This way you can free up the Ring of Royal Grandeur from the cube and use something else, such as a convention of elements or whatever you see fit. But I do recommend going with Captain Crimson's, and if you are going to go that route, intelligence, vitality, armor is probably better here once again than all resist, but then you're going to want the 2 sockets with topaz. Moving along to the rings, we're going to be taking Rachel's Ring of Larceny, crit, cooldown, and a socket. You can take Bane of the Trapped in here, but if you have enough damage, feel free to go for Wreath of Lightning instead for even more movement speed. And for the other ring, we'll be taking Ring of Emptiness. Intelligence is okay. Once again, I think cooldown reduction is a little bit better for the rings, but then crit, socket, and Boon of the Hoarder for the movement speed in T16. Moving on to the boots, Mundunugu's, we're going to go with Intelligence, Vitality, armor, once again, probably better than all resist. I happen to have just rolled a lot of all resist on this character, but we're tanky enough for T16, so I'm not too worried about it. And lastly, you're going to want that Spirit Barrage % damage. Next up for the offhand, we're going to take Gazing Demise. Watch out for that secondary roll. You're going to want to get one as high as possible, but once again, it is just a T16 build. I did start with one with a very low roll, and we still did fine. However, the stats you are going to want to take would be Intelligence, % life or vitality, crit chance, cooldown, and Spirit Barrage damage. For the weapon, we're going to take the Barber, % damage, intelligence, cooldown, and adding a socket with Ramalandi's gift, go ahead and put an emerald in there. Now don't worry too much about how this secondary roll reads. It kind of makes it sound like when you're attacking, you're not actually going to be dealing damage to enemies and you're going to have to wait and stop casting to make it explode. This is not necessarily the case in T16. You are going to be doing enough initial damage up front to actually take enemies out very quickly. I'll go ahead and demonstrate that in the gameplay portion of the video. Alright, now moving on over here, let's go ahead and go over the cube. First off, we're going to take Shukrani's Triumph. After the initial duration of Spirit Walk ends, it continues to last until you attack 3 times, or if you come within 20 yards of an elite. While you're in the Spirit Realm, you're dealing 100% increased damage. This is incredibly important because our Manitou rune is going off while we're in the Spirit Realm. Next up, we'll take Krelm's Buff Belt. This is just more movement speed for our character. And lastly, as we discussed earlier, Ring of Royal Grandeur in the cube so that we can benefit from the 6 and 3-piece set bonuses on our character. Alright, and so for the follower, I would recommend taking the Enchantress, mostly just because we're going to get 10% cooldown reduction, as long as you get her up to 25,000 intelligence. The essential pieces of gear for this follower are going to be the token that ensures that she cannot die. You're going to want to take the Flavor of Time, Nemesis Bracers, Oculus Ring, Avarice Band because this is a T16 build and we benefit from gaining those health globes, and lastly, the Gloves of Worship. Other items such as the Broken Crown and the homing pads can be a little bit convenient, but aren't necessarily needed. For the skills, I do recommend going Temporal Pulse. Prophetic Harmony is essential. We need this cooldown reduction, Powered Shield, and Focused Mind. If you happen to find yourself dying a lot with this build, which you probably shouldn't, you should be fine. It is relatively tanky, and for the most part we're in the Spirit Realm, so we're pretty safe. We've also got that shield on us from the Molten Wildebeest Gizzard. But should you be dying a lot, feel free to change this over to Fate's Lapse. Alrighty guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Go ahead and give this build a try. It is pretty easy to put together. Once again, you don't really need phenomenal gear to make it work. It's just a T16 build. Go ahead and drop a comment down below. Let me know how it works out for you. I'm going to go ahead and film a little bit of gameplay to put up real quick. But as always guys, really appreciate you for watching. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.